It brings me no joy to say I told you so, because the ramifications for this story are horrifying for anybody in media who is calling out corruption and evil, the evil that is happening in our government. Media Matters has the story. Alex Jones claims InfoWars host Owen Shroyer was charged for free speech. Without question, there is no doubt, the sentencing document, what they are asking for in the sentencing of Owen Shroyer, 120 days, and they are outright saying his speech, while none of it was direct incitement, his speech was inflammatory, and as such, he should go to prison. Now, Owen Shroyer was charged for being at the Capitol, not in the Capitol. And what they're saying is that the rhetoric leading up to, during, and after warrants a prison sentence. You know, I missed this one when the charging documents dropped on the 5th. It was only last night that I saw the tweet from Clint Russell where he said, I hoped Tim Pool was wrong. He wasn't. And I was like, what was I right about this time? Right. I had said, if they're going after lawyers, they're going after the people on January 6th who bumbled about and had no idea what was going on. We've known that for years. They then went after Donald Trump and his lawyers. And I said, after his lawyers, they are going to go after people who were saying things before January 6th that they will deem to be inflammatory or incitement. The next step in this is media personalities. Owen Shroyer is a bit of a middle ground. To be fair, there are many people who are not in D.C., many people who are in D.C. but not at the Capitol, who are expressing views that I believe the government will call incitement. Now, Owen Shroyer was there at the Capitol, and he was on the grounds, but not in the Capitol. Now, this is interesting. They had a permit to be rallying just outside the Capitol grounds. I might have actually been, it was on the other side of the building. So I'm curious as to what their actual argument is. They're claiming that because Alex Jones and Owen Shroyer, InfoWars, had an image of them bullhorning outside the Capitol, they intended for this to happen. It's incitement, and that's what they want. Make no mistake. They are seeking to imprison Owen Shroyer because he said things they did not like. Now, I'm sure the liberals and the left will make the argument. They're already lying, for one, saying that he went in the Capitol. He didn't. And they're saying it's incitement. He was saying things like, we can't let the corrupt get away with this. And, you know, we are the revolution, things like that. You know, I'm pretty sure that was exactly the reason for the First Amendment in the Bill of Rights. A redress of the right to a redress of grievances, freedom of speech, and the press, of which Owen Shroyer is literally everything he did. Demanding accountability, demanding that there be I mean, to be completely honest, the rhetoric that they're citing in this document is rather vague. It's him saying there's corruption and we got to weed it out. And there's going to be, people are going to be really mad about this. And they're like, inflammatory. He said, we're going to fight back. You see what he means? Man, Owen Shroyer is the midpoint. He was there rallying and they're trying to imprison him for speech. Hate to say I told you so. The next step, the next thing I fear, is going to be people who are not even in D.C., but were making videos praising what was going on or calling for some kind of direct action. And of course, nobody said that you should commit X. Like, no one said, do this specific thing. But there were many people who were calling for action. And in this instance, what they're citing of Owen Shroyer is that he said, are we prepared to do what must be done, whatever that may be? Now, here's the crazy thing. In Owen's mind, he could be literally thinking about calling Mike Pence on the phone. That's whatever that may be. But they twist it to make it seem like he was telling people to go commit acts of violence. Media Matters doesn't even refute what Alex Jones said. Jones says they're openly telling you that you live in Nazi Germany. He says, I didn't cover it, but the Gateway Pundit did. Breaking, D.C. prosecutors seek 120 days in prison for Owen Shroyer for speaking out against stolen election 2020. Speech is now a crime. Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. They've tried to lock people up for speech for quite some time, even with the First Amendment. He says, now that's not just the Gateway Pundits headline. I have the charging document the feds put forward. Here it is. It says Owen Shroyer needs to go to prison for still saying, and they list August 27th, that in August, Owen still said he thinks the election's stolen, and he called President Biden a pedophile. And they said, so we're asking the judge, because of his speech, to put him in prison for 3 months to a year. Now let that sink in. In Australia, they passed a law to break into your social media and pose as you and commit crimes. It says it right in the law. It doesn't sound real, does it? Human-animal hybrids doesn't sound real either. Thanks, Alex. This charging document, it's all over the internet. The left calling for his head literally says dozens of times, he won't shut up. He's not remorseful. He doesn't like Joe Biden. He wants him to be in jail, to the judge. They don't want to just censor you, folks. They want to put you in prison. Forgive them, Father. They know not what they do. I mean, can you imagine the people that with a straight face live like this? They're asking for prison time for a man that did nothing and was there with me trying to stop people going into the Capitol because he still says he thinks the election was stolen. Whoa, hold on there a minute. That's right. Famously, Alex Jones, his rally and his people were saying, do not go in. Well, hold on there a minute. How could you charge him for incitement and rhetoric when they're literally saying don't do it? Yeah, you see where this is going. Owen Shroyer being there is an easy target for them. I think we have the story here from ABC, June 23rd. Owen Shroyer pleads guilty to Capitol riot charge. Pleaded guilty to joining the mob of Donald Trump supporters who rioted at the Capitol. Wow. Despite the famous video, Alex Jones with his permanent rally saying, do not go in. It's a trap. Amazing. In the charging document, they call Jones person one, apparently. Let me break this down for you. It is unambiguous. The charging document right here. This is the U.S. versus Jonathan Owen Shroyer. In the months prior to January 6th, Schroyer spread election disinformation, paired with violent rhetoric to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of viewers. He presciently warned in November 2020 that if Joe Biden became president, it's not going to be a million peaceful marchers in D.C. Let's stop right there. What does that mean? Many on the left said quite literally the exact same thing. This is not instructive. It's predictive. Anyone could have predicted that same thing. On January 6, 2021, Schroyer took to a megaphone before leading a crowd to the Capitol. The Democrats are posing as communists, but we know what they really are. They're just tyrants. They're tyrants. And so today on January 6th, we declare death to tyranny, death to tyrants. Schroyer did not stop at the sight of tear gas or sounds of explosions on the west side of the Capitol. He continued marching around the top of the East Steps, chanting 1776, where rioters would eventually violently breach the Capitol and its police line and halt the transfer of presidential power. Schroyer did not step foot inside the Capitol. He did not need to. Many of those who listened to him did instead. In the aftermath, he has blamed Antifa and told his followers, we should have been proud of what happened. This is interesting. I disagree. I don't know the context and I don't trust the government as they describe it. But I don't think it was Antifa. I think there were feds, but I do think a lot of people just acted a fool. You got people who actually thought occupying a building would do anything for them. It's kind of laughable. The only thing that really could have changed things is if Mike Pence kicked the votes back to the states for review, and then there was a House delegation vote. January 6th was pretty dumb. Pretty dumb. Schroyer helped create January 6th. The government respectfully requests that this court sentence him to 120 days of incarceration, 12 months of supervised release, 60 hours of community service, and $500 in restitution. Now, I say this is a midpoint because it is not fair to just say someone was speaking up, so they're charging him. But grains of sand to make a heap, as I often say. The issue with Owen Shroyer is that he had previously received some kind of charge in 2019. And under a deferred prosecution agreement, they say because of this deferred agreement, he was not supposed to protest on Capitol grounds. That's an agreement he made. They say, I want to see if they have this. They say Schroyer was arrested December 9th, 2019 in D.C. after disrupting a House Judiciary Committee meeting in the Longworth House office building by jumping out of his seat and shouting in a loud manner. He got like a disorderly thing. They gave him a deferred, a DPA? Deferred prosecution agreement. Yeah, deferred prosecution agreement. And he agreed not to utter loud, threatening, or abusive language, not to engage in disorderly, disruptive conduct at the Capitol, etc., etc. Now, hold on. We can argue outright that violates the First Amendment as it is. Quite literally, the right to peaceably assemble and protest and seek a redress of grievances. Wouldn't that fall under you can show up and yell things? And the worst thing that should happen if you do is you are just removed for being disruptive. That's reasonable to me. But criminal charges and deferred, blah, blah, blah. I don't know, man. That's already starting to get interesting. They have a map of the Capitol grounds here. Moving forward, they go to mention that the DPA was a 4-month term. The COVID pandemic emergency told this time period for Schroyer to complete his hours. As of January 5th and 6th, Schroyer had not completed any hours of community service, and the DPA and Schroyer's stay-away order from the Capitol was still active. You see, it was supposed to have been resolved, but they're arguing because he did not do community service, it was active nearly a year and a few months later. Or I'm sorry, yeah, this is a year and a few months. In the weeks before January 6th, Schroyer stoked the flames of potential disruption of the certification vote by streaming disinformation about alleged voter fraud and stolen election of thousands, perhaps millions. This is where it gets interesting. This should not be in a charging document, period. Should not be here. There should be no attempt to use someone's protected speech and political views to justify sentencing them over protesting. If the argument is he wasn't supposed to be there, the charging document should literally say, with the DPA in place, Schroyer was not supposed to be there. We hereby seek X amount of time. That's it. I really doubt a DC judge is going to side with InfoWars on this one in any way. They say, Exhibit 1, November 13th, 2020, news to share, Million MAGA Eve. Interesting. What is that? On November 13th, 2020, Schroyer bragged to a crowd in DC that InfoWars Stop the Steal movement was able to get 40,000 followers in Parler in 5 days and millions of streaming views, proving that we are still in control of this country, which you'd think would be de-radicalizing. The following day, on November 14th, Schroyer spoke to another DC crowd through a bullhorn stating, if the mainstream media did not want to broadcast the American Revolution 2.0, then fine. InfoWars will take the exclusives. I remember during Occupy Wall Street, they said quite literally the same thing. The revolution will not be televised. It will be televised by us and many things like that. They referred to what they were doing as they occupied numerous cities and the Brooklyn Bridge and Zuccotti Park in D.C., as well as many other places around the country. They called it a revolution. In fact, there was a period during Occupy where the activists actually went into all of the congressional buildings and hundreds of people were marching around. Everybody peacefully went through the metal detectors and they walked around and they said they can't do anything about it. It's a public building. Now, don't get me wrong. I get it. There is a difference between having the electoral vote count with everyone in session and closing off the area for security reasons and a random day in which people just showed up. I get that. Let's read more. By December 30th, 31st, 2020, InfoWars had turned its sights specifically to January 6th, airing a poster with Schroyer depicted with other members of InfoWars broadcasting team directly in front of the image of the Capitol. Be a part of history, fight for Trump. Now, this is the interesting thing. The InfoWars team was saying, don't go in the Capitol. And they had a permitted rally to be there. They're now using this image of bullhorns, protected speech, as justification for their charges. They are explicitly saying the speech of them is a reason why he should go to prison. They're not explicitly saying it's criminal, but understand this. By putting these things in the charging document, they are outright saying your free speech and constitutionally protected activities warrant us to give you an extended sentence in prison. On January 5th, Schroyer returned to D.C., where he broadcast from Freedom Plaza stating, Americans are ready to fight. We aren't exactly sure what's going to look like in a couple of weeks if we cannot stop the certification of this fraudulent election of Joe Biden. We are letting the crooks in Congress know that we know Donald J. Trump won this election. And so the crooks in Congress had better know that we, the people, are here. We're loud. We're going to be here all week. We are the new revolution. What does any of that mean? You had Maxine Waters say it again in people's faces. You've had many Democrats do quite literally the same thing. You've had them storm the Capitol building. You've had them storm congressional buildings. These videos have gone viral. They disrupted the proceeding of a Supreme Court appointment. Nobody cares. DC and the feds are weaponized. And so what you need is, look, Ron DeSantis says he's going to start pardoning people. But what he said about the Proud Boys was that we'll use pardons and commutations to make sure that the charges are all equal. What that means is, he may come in and say that the Proud Boys have already served their time, therefore they're being commuted. We're commuting their sentence or pardoning them. What he's not saying is that he's letting anybody go. He's saying it will be equal and just. I think it's fair. Trump even said some of these people deserve to go to jail. Some people have said the Proud Boys who rioted shouldn't get any jail time. That's completely wrong. Anybody who was rioting and fighting with cops, I think, deserves some kind of criminal charge. No question. Owen Shroyer was just saying stupid things. And I don't mean to say that fighting for this country or whatever is stupid. I'm saying, look, man, when you're outside of the Capitol building, it's closed off, and you've got people marching around and you're saying things like death to tyrants, I'm sorry. You're allowed to say it, but I do think be careful. That being said, it's not criminal. You're allowed to express your opinions and say things and say we are fighting back and we are the revolution. I don't see where they explain that Schroyer gave explicit instructions on what to do. That day, Schroyer also called into another live broadcast of InfoWars stating, what I'm afraid of is if we do not get this false certification of Biden stopped this week, I'm afraid of what this means the rest of the month. I'm afraid of what this is going to mean to these Trump supporters and what it's going to mean about January 21st. He goes on to say that he thinks it's stolen. But really, if you take a look at what Alex Jones was saying, don't go in. You take a look at what Trump was saying, peacefully protest. It was the only actions entertained was that members of Congress would challenge the results. Mike Pence would not accept electoral votes from states that were in question and with pending lawsuits. Instead, Mike Pence was dropped to his knees and just begged to not be involved at all. You know what I think? I think that Mike Pence should have petitioned the states, the state legislatures that have the absolute constitutional authority over their elections, and said to them, you bring me a resolution arguing that these must be returned, and I'll abide by the Constitution. But there are a lot of problems with that happened. There was a lawsuit, or a lot of lawsuits, but there was Texas v. Pennsylvania, and the courts were not hearing these charges, these cases. Certainly the stupidest thing in the world was storming the Capitol building, but for a lot of people, they had no idea what was going on. Outside of that, we can simply say, when they come out in the charging document and go on to say that well after the fact, let's advance to the well after the fact point, that even today, as Alex Jones pointed out, let's jump past the January 6th stuff. Yep, Owen Shroyer was there on the Capitol grounds. Should not have been, and they argue that what he was saying was inflammatory and incitement, etc. Sure, make your arguments about this stuff, right? You've got exhibits from other other times, but I want to make sure. I find the. It's long. Here we go. Yada yada yada. Exhibit 14. Here we go. Let's jump to this. On May 17th, 2021, on his InfoWars broadcast, Schroyer stated that he realized something about January 6th. While downplaying that, it got a lot out of control. There was some violence against the police. There was a little bit of violence in the building too, property damage. He stated that January 6th was like a mouse that roared compared to when Democrats riot. He wanted to say that we should have rejected the narrative of January 6th, and frankly, at a certain level, we should have been proud of it. We should have been proud of what happened on January 6th, but they stole that from us. On August 20th, 2021, the day that Schroyer learned there was a warrant for his arrest based on his actions, he broadcast on InfoWars a big story. Schroyer stated that the FBI should be investigated for their role in January 6th and that Democrats stood down security intentionally. My point here, they are explicitly using speech after the fact about his political views on what happened to justify criminally sentencing him. And also, I want to make sure, I can be as reasonable as possible. These charges were coming about well before Trump was indicted or the lawyers were indicted. We are now getting this document on September 5th. It's released saying that his speech plays a role in why he should be in prison. This is not the exact scenario that I was describing. I'm not going to sit here and say that everything I say is perfectly true or anything like that. No. I said that they're going to start going after media personalities who were inflammatory or otherwise. This certainly falls under that umbrella, although it's far from the center of what I was describing specifically. So let me explain. There are many people who, out of the state or in D.C., but not anywhere near the Capitol, had made videos where they were saying inflammatory things. And in this case, Owen Shroyer is not explicitly saying everybody go commit specific action, which is the requirement for incitement, to give specific action. We've talked about it quite a bit on Timcast IRL. There were people on various social media platforms, who I will not name, who were actually saying, like, people should go in and do thing. I'm not going to repeat what they said. We should give them, and then inflammatory rhetoric, go in there and commit act. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying anybody said to hurt anybody. People were explicitly saying, whether as figures of speech or otherwise, that there should be a riot. And I'm like, yo, those people are going to jail. It is not even 2024 yet. And they are telling you explicitly that what Owen Shroyer said after January 6th warrants a prison sentence. This is where we are. I want to talk a bit more about the history of this country. I want to make a few points. PJ Media has an article. Why are the Proud Boys getting longer sentences than murderers? Vivek Ramaswamy slams the Biden DOJ persecution of J6 defendants. And yesterday, we had someone call in, maybe you're listening, saying, how could I praise the founding fathers, but then tell people to comply and work within the system? What do you think the founding fathers did? This is the hilarious thing. This view that so many people claim to have about the American Revolution is like based off of a cereal box or something. And I'm not saying I'm an expert on history. I'm not a historian. I just read. That's all I really do. And it's surface level, skin deep, but I read a little bit about this stuff. The founding fathers petitioned the government for 2 decades or longer, over and over and over again, just sending strongly worded letters. What ends up happening was an escalation on the part of the crown. And there's 1,000,001 scenarios and a ton about history that we could cite and reference as to what started everything. It's not any one thing. The Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party. What I find truly fascinating when you look at history, let's bring up the battles of Lexington and Concord, and we'll talk about what we want to avoid and what we want to happen. Today, times are very different. It is not the same as 1776. And my friends, 1776 is not even the appropriate year. But look, I get it. Most people don't know. 1776 was when the Declaration of Independence was signed and a statement was made after a formal meeting that we can govern ourselves. 13 colonies. There were more than 13 British colonies. You realize that, right? Famously, Quebec was like, we're not interested. We're totally fine with where we are. Formerly a French colony. They didn't share the same kind of worldview as the other colonies. And it was even difficult for some of these colonies to convince the southern colonies to join, slavery being a big issue. So what happens? There's a lot to break down. And I can't give you the full historical context. But I want to explain something. 248 years ago, man, times were certainly different. Communication was certainly different. But the simple version of what happened, the Boston Tea Party happens. A bunch of patriots disguise themselves as Native Americans, among other things, go onto a boat, throw a bunch of tea in the water. Now, it's funny when you, I'm not a historian, so I can only give you a cursory understanding of this stuff. But we heard, typically you hear from people that it was because they had raised the taxes on tea or something to that effect. Others have stated, if you're a historian, you can correct in the comments below. It was actually, they dropped the taxes on tea, making it harder for American tea producers to compete with British tea, and it was disruptive to the colonial economy. I'm not an expert on this stuff. Either way, they threw tea into the ocean, destroying it. This resulted in the Coercive Acts, or the Intolerable Acts. Basically, because of the destruction of the tea, the Crown Parliament was like, and this is 1774, 2 years, okay? Okay, 2 years before the Declaration of Independence. And the Revolutionary War started in 1775. The war was already happening before the Declaration was even signed. 4 acts were enacted by Parliament, basically because of, what was going on. And this is really amazing. It goes back even further than that. The British Parliament hoped these punitive measures would, by making an example of Massachusetts, reverse the trend of colonial resistance to parliamentary authority that begun with the Sugar Act of 1764. My friends, 12 years before the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That would make Thomas Jefferson like was 14 years old. The founding fathers were children when the revolutionary period began. And for decades, they simply said, please listen to us. There was no, the founding fathers did not organize to go attack people or anything like this. So what happens? The Crown enacts the Intolerable Acts or the Coercive Acts, depending on your perspective, I suppose, because of the Boston Tea Party. They say on December 16, 1773, a group of patriot colonists associated with Sons of Liberty destroyed 342 chests in the tea of Boston, Massachusetts, became known as the Boston Tea Party. The colonists partook in the action because Parliament had passed the Tea Act, which granted the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies, thereby saving the company from bankruptcy. This made British tea less expensive. In addition, there was they added a small tax. It angered the colonists. News of the Boston Tea Party reached England in 1774. Parliament responded by passing 4 laws. Now, isn't this funny? It took a month or so for this news to make it to Parliament, thousands of miles away. 3 of the laws were intended to directly punish Massachusetts. This was for the destruction of private property to restore British authority in Massachusetts and otherwise reform colonial government in America. Consider the scenario. Very different from today. You've got a government that's thousands of miles away. The further away your centralized government is, it's harder to manage things. People protest. Why? The government had given a corporation a monopoly in order to protect them from bankruptcy. Oh boy. There are parallels to today. We could talk about 2008. We can talk about the big bank bailouts and what that led to. Occupy Wall Street could perhaps be seen as our Boston Tea Party, maybe. The initial protests of Occupy were not leftist. They were populist. And from this is born the populist wave. Now, it's been quite some time. It's been a decade. I don't know exactly where this goes. It may not be everything happening in the same path or history rhymes doesn't repeat. You have these people marching down the street saying it's 1776. And 1776 was a response to the British government attacking the colonists, who were British subjects, mind you. Which brings me to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, the famous shot heard round the world, which kicked off the American Revolutionary War. The battles of Lexington and Concord were some of the leading military engagements of the American Revolutionary War. The battles were fought on April 19th, 1775 in Middlesex County, province of Massachusetts, within the towns of Lexington and Concord, Lincoln, and Menotomy, probably pronouncing that wrong, present-day Arlington and Cambridge. They marked the outbreak of armed conflict between the Kingdom of Great Britain and patriot militias from America's 13 colonies. I gave you the overly simplified version. Tea Party happens. Government's bailing out massive corporations. Then you get a month later, they say, we're going to pass these restrictive acts to restore control over this colony, which we view as being in rebellion. Patriot militias began to form. Outside of Boston, you had Crown control, which is government control, and you had militia control outside of this area. The Crown then was basically, I don't know if it was the Crown directly, but the regulars, which, keep in mind, all of these people are British subjects. The government is the Crown. You know, the famous line where they say Paul Revere was like, the British are coming. No, they didn't. They were all British. So the regulars or the redcoats, likely the redcoats, some say the regulars are coming. These were the well-regulated military men of the Crown. They go to seize weapons. Redcoats they were called, or devils by colonists. Where do we have the? In 1774, colonial leaders adopted the Suffolk Resolves in resistance to the alterations made to the Massachusetts colonial government by British Parliament following the Boston Tea Party. The Colonial Assembly responded by forming a patriot provisional government known as the Massachusetts Provisional Congress and calling for local militias to train for possible hostilities. The colonial government effectively controlled the colony outside of British-controlled Boston. In response, the British government of 1775 declared Massachusetts to be in a state of rebellion. I don't know exactly where all of this goes, but I will stress this point. We're nowhere near this right now, okay? We are at the point of large-scale protests. That's it. We are now seeing the government go after people who protested. Here's my fears. First, I'll state what we want to happen. What we want to happen is people chill out, no violence. We want a redress of grievances. We want powerful litigation, lawsuits, challenges to the courts, an election of someone we hope may actually start weeding out corruption. Perhaps Donald Trump, perhaps not. That may be the best option we have. I don't know what the probability is that Trump actually gets it done, but he's the best case scenario. Trump goes in, brings in an AG. We see the weeding out of the corruption. The difference between the crown and the government today is that we actually do have the Constitution and a vision of the founding fathers, which grants us more legal rights in challenging these injustices. And there is a path to victory through a standard legal process. We are dealing with a fifth generational war, which requires us to think tactfully and to remain peaceful. There is no victory in which people are violently doing anything. There is no reality where occupying a building grants you political power. It's not the 1600s. Even back then, it didn't matter. What matters is confidence in the system. That means we have to win the argument and the hearts and minds of people, and that is done through moral victories, cultural victories, PR victories, and we're getting those with these woke corporations failing. We are getting those with the rise of companies like Public Square, with these with the parallel economy. You get ultra right, a conservative dad's ultra right beer. You get Jeremy's chocolate. You get Jeremy's razors. You get Cast Brew coffee. You get Cousin T's pancake mix. We build the parallel economy, which allows us to command more resources and litigious authority. We file more lawsuits. We win. When we win that war, we do it peacefully and we do it right through the system that we have before us, which we are attempting to preserve. We are not challenging an unjust crown that declares authority through divine providence. What we have today is a government set up by the founding fathers that is of, for, and by the people. But corruption is supplanting it. We want to preserve that system, not rip it to shreds. So this idea of it's 1776 once again, no. I get the sentiment. I'm not trying to be a dick to anybody who's trying to push out the corruption. But my view on this is times are different. Strategies are different. Conflict is different. And we don't want to destroy the far leftists do. We want to protect and preserve, renew, restore. And with this, there will be a rebirth. That means Trump's far from perfect. But should he win, then I hope we get dramatic reforms. We get figurative revolutionary change. There are people right now that keep citing Thomas Jefferson and the blood of patriots. And I'm like, dude, we're not there. We are not even at any kind of Boston Tea Party or Boston Massacre level conflict. Right. And I think the Boston Massacre was like, what was it, 1769, 1770? The Boston Tea Party was 1773. And I believe the Boston Massacre was, let's pull up the American Revolution, because I don't have the Boston Massacre pulled up. My point is this. The American Revolution began 1765. Arguably with the the Sugar Act, 1764 was the main kickoff. It ended with the Treaty of Paris in 1783. I strongly recommend people read more about it. And I'm not even a historical expert on all of this stuff, but I can tell you there are a lot of questions about whether or not anyone actually had the authority to declare independence. Did it even matter? I don't think it mattered. I'm sorry. Obviously, the Declaration of Independence was a powerful statement. But you need to understand that hostilities had begun with the crown attacking the colonists because they kept filing a petition. Let me simplify this. The colonists keep sending strongly worded letters to Parliament. Parliament says, we don't care. Eventually, the colonists protest. The crown then sends in soldiers, effectively National Guard or police. It's not the same equivalent because they didn't have police departments the same way back then. But this results in particularly like the Quartering Act, allowing British regulars to live in the homes of colonists. This stuff was shocking and offensive. People got mad about it. Outside of Boston, militias started to gather. I have described just this on many circumstances. My fear is that confidence in the government will be rocked because they keep doing things that are out of line with our traditions and our social norms. It is not socially acceptable in this country to sentence someone to 3 months in prison or more because of their speech after the fact. When they were engaging in politics and saying the government's corrupt, then you say, we're going to lock you up for that. That is outside of the social norms and results in a shattering of the confidence in the system. More and more people, left and right, are viewing the government as illegitimate. That's a problem we want to avoid. We want confidence in the system. So here's my fear. As the confidence is shattered, you get local groups forming militias, not out of any kind of demand or call by any kind of unified continental army, as we saw with the Boston, with the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Militia groups were just forming. Provisional governments, whatever you want to call it. Groups came together and said, we have to resist. When they say that January 6th was 1776, no, it's more akin to like 1774. And that terrifies me because I don't think we want that. I don't think the people in Massachusetts wanted that. I don't think the founding fathers wanted it. The founding fathers would have much preferred that Parliament simply abide by their requests and be more fair. I'll tell you this. If the crown, the British crown, went to the founding fathers, many of whom had no legitimate authority in government, there's questions about this. Many of them were governmental leaders, don't get me wrong. If they went to the colonists and said, how can we compromise to better work together? There would have been no revolution. We would have remained subjects of the crown. It's really remarkable, isn't it? But the crown kept saying, shut your mouths, you backwater morons, and we're going to tell you what to do. They used an iron fist. And an iron fist was met with resistance. That's what I fear happens now. The sentencing of Owen Shroyer will only exacerbate the problems. Instead of them coming out, this is what the founding fathers truly understood. It was, I forgot the name. You guys know this. After the Revolutionary War, there were many people who fought who were not paid properly, and they entered rebellion. And so you had, I think, Thomas Jefferson. Ian brings it up all the time. Blanket pardons all of these guys. Brilliant move. And he said, we cannot begin a new nation by fighting amongst ourselves and doing exactly what the crown did. We must accept this. I forgot the guy's name. You guys probably remember it. So Ian is partially correct about that, but I don't think he's correct about pardoning, say, like the likes of Hillary Clinton or whatever. I'm saying the appropriate move of Joe Biden's government right now to simmer tensions completely and to resolve the conflict and crisis is actually not to prosecute these people. It's to say, Owen Shroyer, please recognize we don't want... Imagine this. Imagine the prosecution came out and said, in a statement, Owen Shroyer, what you did was wrong. You should not have been fanning the flames of conflict and this angry sentiment. Your views on what happened to this election are incorrect. We believe your statements were disinformation, but we recognize your anger and frustration. We don't want things to escalate. We hope you recognize the system seeks justice. And for that, we recommend time served, penalty served. Owen Shroyer, continue your good work and please be more respectful. It's the best we can say. What is Owen Shroyer going to say to that? He's going to say, wow, okay. Wow. Imagine if the prosecution came out to all the January 6ers. Imagine if Joe Biden came out and said, we understand the anger and the sentiment that people have. We understand the revolutionary nature of this country, but this is not the path forward and will only lead to more conflict and crisis. For that, we hereby issue a blanket pardon of all people who were criminally charged over January 6th. Imagine if Joe Biden did that. That would de-escalate things. Chinese finger trap problem. The more they pull, the more they attack, the more you are likely to end up with what I fear. And that is, as I've mentioned it, militia groups forming around the country, just saying the government's illegitimate. And why have I said that? Read about the battles of Lexington and Concord. Read about how the Continental Congress forms. Read about how different people around in different colonies were not unified and simply were saying, we reject this. That's my fear. I want a legal victory. I want to sit back and put our feet up and be like, we filed the proper paperwork. We did the right lawsuits. We campaigned effectively. Trump got in, arrested corrupt individuals, and we did the right thing. What I fear is, as the government brings a boot down on the necks of people like Owen Shroyer, you will end up just with people saying the government's illegitimate. The left already did it. The right has begun to do it. Had been doing it for some time now. The left started it with Donald Trump. The right carried out their vision with Joe Biden. And the end result of this, if people don't just calm down, it's going to be, whether you want it or not, conflict. It's interesting because I wonder if you could view, say the battles of Lexington and Concord similarly to what's going on with Stop Cop City. The leftists could make similar arguments that they're rejecting the authority of the state, the police, and they're actively fighting back. A shootout happened in Atlanta. A guy was killed. I wonder, depending on what happens, if there's a second American Civil War, not a revolution, do they talk about the various skirmishes left and right that led to the escalation? I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.